Jamie, can you see if there's anyone on the phone lines there?
They're picking houses. You can't handle it.
Hello.
Oh,
Hey.
is that Don?
Hey, Don. Yeah, Don and Dan.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think he was planning on it. Yeah. I think Missy's on the horn there. Missy, do you know if Roger Mann's planning on coming in person here?
Yeah, he sent a message, I don't know, maybe about 3:15 that he was heading down your way, so hopefully he'll be there very shortly.
Okay. We can, I think it started there. And then, yeah. All right, thanks.
Ready to go?
You ready, Jane? Yep.
All right, I'd like to call the August 2nd SMAC meeting to order, please, and thank you all for coming. Before we get started, I would like to let you all know that our leader is here, Commissioner Green, and we would like to thank him for being here. It's good to see you.
Thank you. I noticed I got to change the dress attire for the commission meeting. I want to be more like y'all.
And if we could, I would just like to do a roll call maybe of everybody that's here, starting from my right.
Peyton Mason, Gloucester, Virginia.
Ben Johnson, Suffolk.
Richard Harding, Reedville, Virginia.
Ernie George, Waystone.
J.C. Hudgens, Virginia Watermen's Association.
Wayne France, Northern Neck.
Blake Coward, Lotsburg.
Cody Metcalf, Eastern Shore.
Beverly Ludford, Virginia Beach.
Tommy Kellum, Weems.
And on the phone, who do we have?
Dan Dodge, Tangier. Don Porter, Saxes.
All right. So that's a good crew, and we'd like to thank you all for your participation today. Our first item is the approval of the agenda. Is there anything that needs to be added to the agenda or before we proceed? If not, I'll accept a motion to.
Mr. Chairman. At the end, I had a couple of new business items
Yes, go ahead. Go ahead. We can put those on.
to talk about the hand scrape or the dredge being in code and a definition of what it is and what the weight and so forth of it is in actual code.
Okay.
And to talk about the Pianki tank patent tong line as it stands now.
Okay. All right, we have a couple of additions to the agenda. Is there anything else that needs to be added to the agenda? If not, I'll accept a motion to accept the agenda.
Mr. Chairman there?
Yes, go ahead.
I believe Virginia Institute of Marine Science wanted to address the advisory committee regarding a project as part of that quota managed seed harvest. I think they just asked for 5 minutes, but we can include that in that agenda item if that works out.
Okay, all right. We have three items added to the agenda. Is there anything else? All right, not hearing anything else, do I have a motion to accept the agenda as amended?
I'll make a motion, we accept the agenda as amended.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Any more discussion? If not, all in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? All right, the motion passes. I guess now I'll hand it over to you, Andrew.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman there. I guess coming up, it's as a reminder, if folks haven't felt the temperature outside, it's pretty warm out there, so I just wanted to remind this group and the public in general about our warm weather harvest regulations, and I'll remind folks that those are going to be extended through October this year, so into the public oyster harvest season for the first time.
The entire month?
The entire month of October, yeah. So these are established by regulation, and really their primary purpose is to be in compliance with the Vibrio control plans and with the National Shellfish Sanitation Program. So basically to ensure that shellfish are safe to eat all summer long, which they are if handled properly. So this covers all of your shading, your icing, all of that stuff that we have to do in the summertime that folks usually aren't used to doing in the month of October. Again, we made these changes over a year ago in anticipation that we'd be more or less forced to make these changes if our numbers started ticking up with Vibrio. Fortunately, they haven't, but sort of the data that's fed into that Vibrio control plan at the National Shellfish Sanitation Program is based on air temperature, water temperature, harvest times, and all of those temperature things are consistently going up, I think, the last couple days. Yep.
Andrew, but did they take into consideration maybe doing it through the 15th of October until the 15th versus the whole month?
Right now, that change has already been made for the entire month of October. Yeah.
What time did that be in October?
The same as September, so it's 12 o'clock p.m. to be under refrigeration, so under mechanical or approved refrigeration at that point.
The boat has to hit the dock, or the product has to be refrigerated?
Refrigerated by 12 p.m. Yeah, or you have to have. We lost. There we go. Or you have to have one of the shellfish permits, icing permits, GPS permits that folks use to harvest outside those curfew hours. So these, those are the primary reasons for having that. And again, those are the curfew times right now. So you have to have, if you're not using a shellfish permit for mechanical refrigeration, icing, or a GPS permit, you have to have your oysters off the water and in mechanical refrigeration by these times. So right now in August, it's 10 a.m. Starting in September, it goes all the way to 12 noon. And that October 1st through October 31st deadline was what the committee recommended last year and what the commission approved last year to start that change this October. So that regulation is in effect.
There's no shading or anything required in October?
There is shading required over the area where the oysters are stored on board the vessel in October. So they're not required to be in refrigeration until 12 noon, but the entire harvest time, all the area where you're keeping your oysters has to be shaded, or anywhere where they're stored during the transport time. So in the back of a vehicle or anything like that. Anywhere other than like on the culling board needs to be shaded. So anywhere that those oysters are stored.
Jim?
Yes, go ahead.
Andrew, would you define shading?
I can read the code. It's right there in 1230, but it's basically direct shade over the area where the oysters are stored.
Okay.
So
most people awning, using some type of awning?
right. If you have a bushel basket, and law enforcement is here if you have a question for them, but the definition is basically a direct covering over the area where the oysters are stored. So if I go straight up and I don't hit something that's intersecting the direct rays of sunlight, then it doesn't count as shade.
Would oyster burlap sacks be acceptable?
To us, it's shade. That's the most important.
If they cover all the basket? Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Yeah, because it's, awning's a little difficult with mast and gaff arrangements and all, so a lot of the watermen were concerned with having some kind of alternative method to be able to shade them, Okay.
Yeah, a lot of times just like a loose tarp or a larger thing that you can sort of pull over your area is what a lot of folks, if they're not using the awning there. The awning keeps the sun off you, but anything that keeps the sun off the oysters works out pretty well. Yeah.
All right, thanks.
Oh, no. Jay-Z took it.
And just as a reminder, this is on land-based transport as well. So if they're in mechanical refrigeration on land at that time, that's fine. But if you're putting them in the back of the truck and then taking them to that mechanical refrigeration, there needs to be shade over those oysters during that transport, that land-based transport as well.
So regardless of where you take them or where you transport them or who you sell them to, they have to be on the refrigerated truck by 12 o'clock.
Yep, in that mechanical refrigeration, basically getting cooled down by 12 noon and, or covered in shade during that whole time until they're there. Yeah, unless you're working under some other permit, which I'm not sure a lot of folks are gonna be doing. But those shellfish harvest permits that we issue, the icing permits, in theory could still be used. But hopefully with the way that the season is gonna be established, there would be a need to sort of do something different there on that end.
Okay.
Were there any other questions on the current warm weather harvest restrictions by anybody?
Just to clarify, if you use an ice box, you can work past 12 o'clock, right?
Currently now,
Okay,
yes.
thank
If if you still have that ice permit, you can work past that, but you would still have to apply to whatever the regulated harvest times were for the season. Yeah.
Right, but Shaftong is historically 2 o'clock, so if you were to Shaftong, you could work till 2 o'clock if you had ice box.
That would be the status quo, yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments on the warm water harvest regulations?
All right. So I think are you okay to move on to the next agenda?
Yes, sir. We can move on to quota managed seed harvest.
So this doesn't necessarily have to be seed harvest. This could be quota managed harvest in general, but this was the discussion that we'd started about the Piankatank and Great Wacomico. I think at the end of this, like to have some committee recommendation on an up or down on that and a month recommendation. And then I believe Roger Mann from VIMS would be appropriate time if he's up for it to brief the committee on some of the proposed work that might help with this type of management going forward. So with that, I'll give a little bit of brief background and then be glad to hear what the committee has to say in terms of a recommendation on that. So these are the questions at hand: is quota managed harvest in the Piankatank and Great Wacomico. Would the committee like to see that change? So currently, there hasn't been any public harvest season in these areas for many decades. They were primarily intended as sort of a state replenishment area, so we developed a lot of the seed beds in there beginning in the 1960s to combat the oyster disease at the time with lots of federal funding, and they were public seed beds periodically and then seed beds used for the replenishment program. More recently, we'd allowed sort of a 2-for-1 bushel return and allowed private industry to dredge some locations in the Piankatank and Great Wacomico and then replace the oysters harvested with 2 bushels of shell. Our earlier iteration of that required them to basically pay us to plant 2 bushels, but it was a lot of logistics to track down a lot of folks and sort of asking them for funding to return the 2 bushels, and it really worked at times, but we saw those oyster populations start to go down in those areas. It wasn't working perfectly all the time. If we had poor recruitment for 1 year, we would really work those areas perhaps a little bit too hard with the large dredges, and they weren't always recovering from that 2 bushels of shell planting. When it worked really well, but when it didn't, those areas declined. In addition, there's been, that I'm sure many of you are aware of, a lot of large-scale sanctuary restoration work in and around these areas. So there's been a lot of federal dollars, a lot of state dollars spent on areas that aren't proposed to be open to harvest or were never part of these seed areas, but they are in very close proximity to these historic seed areas. So we're looking for a way to sort of maximize the benefit out of these areas, either by a limited quota managed seed harvest for either private planting, or we can continue to use it as a replenishment program area. Or in this case, I think that at least some of these areas currently have market oyster densities. Again, the areas in question are primarily here in the Great Wacomico. And again, you can see the market oyster density is getting up over 10 per square meter and a lot of smalls there. And then Palaces and Heron Rock and Burton Point in the Piankatank are areas that had a lot of seed harvest in the past. So those are the areas in question. And again, the condition of these areas is good enough where we think that a limited amount of market-sized oysters could be caught from these areas for a controlled quota-managed harvest season. I think the stipulations that both our restoration partners and staff would recommend is that for now, a hand tong season in these areas and require daily call-ins like we do for the James River. So this doesn't have to be something that we put into regulation this next month, but something that we can come back and at a later point and insert into regulation, likely for a season in the spring. So I just wanted to get the committee's input on, do you like this concept of a quota-managed sort of tight season where, say, somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 bushels potentially could come out of these areas over about a month of harvest? Or we could sort of keep status quo where when these areas are available, we could do something else with the seed, primarily at this point looking at moving it on to public grounds in the area. But I think this would be a way that we would get away from the 2-to-1 shell planting that was had some comments that it was sort of favoring folks who had access to shell, and it wasn't really easy for your typical leaseholder or your typical waterman to have access to these areas. So we'd look to probably not continue that program, but look at moving these areas as part of the replenishment program for general public use. But if we went to a quota managed system like this, it would allow sort of broader public use for either private ground seed planting or a general fishery. So those are sort of the questions to discuss. I guess first, would you like to pursue this? And then if that's a yes, what would be the preferred month? Probably this spring for a month-long harvest season in these areas.
Well, gentlemen, I'll put it to you. Is this something you'd like to pursue?
No.
Yes.
Yeah, I would say yes too.
I'm just kind of
I
trying to get
thought
it.
we were going down the line.
Oh, no,
That's why I
I
said-
just want to
Discuss it.
get kind of a consensus on how y'all felt about it.
Yeah. I talked to a lot of watermen, and I'm pretty much in agreement with it. I think it's basically a good idea. It could be tweaked a little bit, I think anything we do to get more watermen to work, I'm for it, naturally. And I think, time-wise, everyone I've talked to would like to see something in the March, April, spring area anyway, because of the James River hand tong and the Potomac tributaries are mostly November, December, January. This would work to coincide with that at the end of the season, so we'd have the hand tongs would have much longer to work, and I think it's, I'm okay with it.
Yeah, I think it's worth a try. I think a lot of it would depend on what kind of information that you guys have, whether it would be better served as a seed area for public grounds or something, or if there's a good number of markets there, then certainly open those areas up to tongers so they could take advantage of it.
I'm in favor of it. We haven't really, Great Wecompka speaking for Great Wecompka, we haven't really took anything off of it for seed for, 4 years?
This would be the fourth year. Yeah.
So I'm in favor of it, and it helps out the watermen, give them some work, and also the private people to have access to replenish some of their beds.
Are we talking about seed or clean calls? I thought we were talking about clean calls.
A little bit of both.
Both, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, what the concept would be, and Roger will touch on sort of as many details as we'd like on this, but I think we'd like to resurvey these areas as part of our normal pat and tong survey, and then we can make a recommendation this spring on if these areas got a phenomenal spat set and we want it to move it to seed, we could do that. But if there's large market oysters there, do that, or sort of a portion of that. So basically make that decision based on the fall survey for the immediate next spring, similar to how we've done it as part of the replenishment program in the past. But instead of doing it as part of the replenishment program, do it as part of a public harvest season based on that immediate survey data that we get in the fall.
Gotcha. See, I'm in favor of using it for seed, but I don't like using a quota-managed clean cull market oyster harvest, because while it seems like a great idea here, if it were to carry over into our pat and tong and our drudge areas 5-10 years in the future, I think that would be detrimental to our oyster supply, because we could potentially catch the oysters up if we only had 5,000 oysters to harvest, 5,000 bushels to harvest, versus stretching it out for the entire month using our method that we use now.
I understand that, but I think it had, something like Great Wecompka hadn't been worked. I think there would be some big oysters starting off, but in the future, I don't think that would be the case.
Yeah, and I think it's difficult to actually go in and survey an area and get an accurate count of how many oysters are there. We've kind of seen that in the past a lot, you know. So that would be one thing that would be detrimental to, you know, we'd have to have, you know, for it to be quota managed, I mean, I don't have a problem reporting in every day. I mean, if I was working there, we have to, you have option of doing it in the public fishery anyway, or you can do it at the end of the month, so that's not a big deal, you know. But to say that, you know, we're going in here and we're gonna harvest 7,000 to 8,000 bushels, you know, is that accurate? Is that, I mean, that's the only thing we have to go by. So I don't know if I'd really like to see it push into the public fishery, you know, if that's the direction that we're going in, maybe, you know. You know, say to come into Patentong Area 1 and say it's 20,000 bushels of oysters there, and when we catch them up, we got to stop, you know. I think the watermen themselves will determine that, you know, when the oysters aren't there, they're not going to work there, you know. So just kind of a different way to think about it, you know.
I don't know, I'm glad to see it open myself. It's been closed since I was a boy.
Yeah.
You know, it's some guidance from my opinion would be for you, your department, to work with Roger's team and establish what that bushel quota could be. And I would like to see an either or, just like James River, where a harvester could make a decision whether he was going to catch seed or whether he was going to catch markets, and a daily call in. And when we get, you know, certainly starting off a conservative figure that everyone agrees on, and once you hit that quota, we, you know, pull out of there. But and I like the idea of the spring that coincides with the James River, because it'll spread everyone out, and it'll give the guys on the northern end of the bay somewhere to work without having to get up and go to James River every morning, and the guys in James River, it'll take some pressure off of them. So I like the idea of the spring.
Would this be clean culls or seed, or which, or both, or?
I think
how would you determine that?
I mean, these areas would really probably mostly be on the condition of the actual resource there. So we might start out with a lower market harvest quota, and then maybe if we got a good spat set and it was a higher count and it was closer to seed, switch over to more of a seed only. But I think doing the either or, but I want to talk it over with VIMS and our law enforcement, but particularly since these are such sensitive areas, what I don't want to have happen is potentially, depending on how we divide up bushel limits per day, if it's just a limited per day, that might be one thing. But if you have no limit on seed and you have a limit on quota on markets, then you just start calling a market seed. But if we just had a total quota period of whatever it was, you could do either or. That might be a way to look it out. And I want to look at the numbers carefully with our colleagues at VIMS and work off the most recent data. But I think an either or, but probably not necessarily both at the same time, I think, on these areas.
I mean, James River works as an either or right now, has for years.
Mm-hmm.
Same location, sit beside somebody catching seed and catch markets, or vice versa.
Well, I guess the difference in the James River is there's sort of areas that are, it's a much larger area, so there's areas that you can go to that are more seed areas, and there's areas where people don't really go for seed as much. They go mostly for markets, or markets that they're calling seed. And these areas are much smaller in focus. We're talking about 40 acres, not 400 acres that would be open. So I think we want.
I was talking more from an enforcement end.
Mm-hmm. I can't speak to enforcement, but they're.
Andrew, do you know off the top of your head what the market oysters per square meter in the James River Tong area is, roughly average?
It varies from area to area, and depends on marketable oysters or market-sized
The
oysters.
mark, well, you said it was 10, was the average on what we're looking at here. How does that compare to the James River?
It depends on reef to reef. I can pull up the specifics there, but some of the Days Point areas are in that 10 to 15 or higher range. And these areas vary from that 8 to 15 range. So close to that, basically at 10 markets per square meter or more, it's a very productive hand tongue area. So the markets are at that area where it would be.
Just about there.
Yeah. So basically, your average set of good-sized tongs, you're getting at least 10 markets or more per lick. Where you're looking at these areas.
I'm lucky to pick up 10 oysters.
I think Peyton's giving lessons right now.
Oh, I have a question, Andrew, about Great Potomac. Is it, what rocks? Is it Shell Bar, Sandy Point, any other ones?
I think right now, most of what we've been taking seed off of has been Shell Bar and Sandy Point, so here. So these would be the primary areas.
The other rocks are not in question at all.
Right, most of these other areas are official sanctuaries. I think we've moved some seed from here before, but most of these other areas are designated sanctuary reefs that haven't been part of that seed program. But most of the seed, I believe, has come off of Shell Bar and Sandy Point there.
Traditionally, yeah.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, go ahead.
Andrew, if we have a quota that's established in concurrence with VIMS, do we really care whether they go for markets or seed? I mean, once we hit that bushel limit, does it matter?
I think that Roger could probably address that in there, but really in this case, I think we're going to be managing mostly for that shell volume. So I think it matters less in these areas as long as we're not getting down below sort of, I'm sure everyone's seen all that liters per square meter. So if there's a good mix in there and you're sort of getting everything versus probably focused harvest, it might end up being a little bit better that way. So I think it matters less, but again.
So I'm thinking the market will control a lot. Obviously, someone's not going to pay market price for seed, and nor is a waterman going to sell markets for seed price. So I think that will kind of level itself out. But and the last question, and this goes to the Pianki tank, how would staff feel about a quota managed market only? And that obviously my question about the patent towing line in the earlier discussion, how do you feel about strictly a managed market fishery? And
in terms of a patent tong market fishery there, that's something that I'd have to think about a little bit more. I'm not quite prepared to answer that on the spot, but again, I would like to see these areas sort of, there's been a lot of money invested in it and sort of maximize that out. So I think it's something that we'd like to explore with this committee and with our colleagues at VIMS on what the best use of these areas to, number one, be sustainable, and number two, for sort of the best economic benefit.
in my question there, a lot of the watermen that I've asked and talked to Ernie and JC and different ones, it seems to water depth and trying to shaft tong those Pianki tank rocks as opposed to Great Wacomica is probably going to be a little bit of an issue. But you know better than.
Yeah, they're right on that edge of an 18-footer being reasonable there or not. I think depending on the tide and where you're working on the rock, they are definitely deeper than some of the other areas there.
Mm-hmm. Andrew, question on either one of these areas, if the recommendation is C, would the C be required to go overboard as it was, big oysters, small oysters, for X number of days before the large oysters were utilized? Or could the individual pick the big oysters out and utilize them then?
Right now, if we're calling it seed, it's a minimum of 30 days overboard. So that would just to keep things clear, that would be the case. If you were selling them as seed oysters, the sort of picking them out probably wouldn't be permissible here. So that's what we've done.
Seeds, they're going to need to go back in the water for 30 days.
Yeah.
It would be illegal to pick the large oysters.
Yes. Yeah.
Andrew, I don't know if you could ask, but we're getting feedback.
If there's someone on the call there, or if they could mute their phone? Or, yeah, okay.
Thank you.
Okay,
I've been trying to unmute him in case he had a problem.
okay, okay. Dan, you hear that?
What? Hear what?
Oh, we're getting a Tangier echo there from you.
Oh, I don't know what to do. Can I mute it?
You can mute it on your end if you can.
How is it? Was it *6 or?
I think so, yep.
All right.
I think that's better.
Yeah.
Okay.
No.
Can you hear me?
Oh, no, we can hear you there.
I'll put my hand over the phone.
All right. Old-fashioned way, there we go. Did you have any thoughts on Piankatank or Great Wacomico seed, Dan?
No, I don't really know enough about it, Andrew.
All right, all right. Well, I think there's relative consensus that we want to do something here. For the most part, it's just sort of the make that determination in the fall. But we can leave it at there. If the committee wants to make a vote, I'd be glad to take one. But I think I can take this. And
Did you want to, I see yes or no up there, did you want to discuss a month, or do you wait on that?
It sounds like March or April, but if there's a favorite, either or. Probably March would be the closest, sort of in continuations to other seasons. But I don't know if there's.
Works for me. Works for me.
I would make a motion that staff work in consultation with them to develop a model for what the quota would be and something to bring back to SMAC to make a decision before the end of the year.
And that would probably be after the fall survey.
Yeah, yeah.
Andrew, when y'all are looking at that, if you got rocks in different depths and you're opening it up to seed, you know, you're looking at a quota that's, say, 10,000 bushels comes off of every rock evenly, it's going to come off of the highest bottom first until there's nothing left.
Mm-hmm.
And so you know that might be something where you want to think about splitting it up, so the deeper rocks being for a patent call, but just something to think about. Because that's what happened in the river too. If the buyer isn't tell them where to go, they're going to go to the shallowest spot.
Mm-hmm.
I got a motion. Do we have a second on that motion?
I'll second the motion.
Any more discussion on it? Hearing none, I'll call all in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? Chair votes aye as well. Motion passes. Thank you, Andrew.
All right. I think now might be a good time to keep the seed discussion going there a little bit. If, all right, if that works. Turn it over to you there, Roger. We got a slide for you.
That's okay. That's an impressive pile of paper. You look very official. Find me a picture.
Dr. Mann, always good to have you with us.
Roger, please. Please.
No, maybe not. Well,
Oh, well.
I had a good one in there, but we didn't take it now.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, it's always nice to come and actually talk to you in person. We're still in the sort of post-COVID trying to work out what we're doing in the world. Do we talk to people, Zoom people, or what do we do? So this is always a pleasure to come here. I'd like to take you back a little bit. I've been coming to these meetings since Dexter Haven first took me to one in February of 1985 when we were over in that little building in a place that I think more than a few of you remember, and we sat in a smoke-filled room that was about a tenth of the size of this and had a conversation. The fishery was in a sad state, and it went through many sad states, and I can remember we've just talked about the Piankatank. At one point in the 90s going out there and doing our surveys and hardly being able to find an oyster at all. Fast forward to the last time I was in this room sitting here with you, and one of the things that sort of struck me about it is that we went through these periods of diseases, and from around 2006 onwards, lots of good things have happened, in part due to these men and Jim Wesson and, you know, all of you working together. It's a model system. we are now at this point where we actually are, we're in a situation of riches. The last time we were in here and we talked about what we would do with replenishment money, part of the problem was we had way more options than we had money to spend it on. That's a nice situation to be in. And in fact, the conversation that you've just had, do we take seed? Do we take markets? Do we take seed and markets? Do we have quotas? Do we have no quotas? Do we have them at this time of the year or that time of the year? And I think we're in a very healthy situation as to how we do this. And what I see and what I have seen for many years here is that these conversations are a back and forth between experienced individuals who put points of view on the table and you come to a decision. That's good. However, there's another part of this in that I sort of sit back there and I collect a lot of data with this man. And, my data sort of collection with this goes back to the 90s when Jim and I first started trying to do a stock assessment through to where we are now. If I go back prior to Andrew and prior to Jim, and I can remember sitting in these meetings listening to Captain Sadler tell you how the world should be run. He has an interesting view on things. Some of you will remember him as a marvelous character. But we're sort of here now, and the question that I have that I will sort of put to you, and this is a fairly simple one. I remember the conversation we had about what do we do with the stuff in the Nansemond. If you had $100,000, or if you had 100,000 bushels of shell, take either one, and you could do anything with it, what would you choose to do?
I don't know.
And it comes to a question of, are you trying to maximize the number of oysters? Are you trying to maximize the dollars? Are you trying to maximize the sustainability? Or, as we often do in these meetings, we have these conversations, and you've just done it, about we need to put something in a certain place at a certain time of the year to keep certain watermen in the business. You want the James River guys at the James, you want the guys from the Northern Neck having something to do. We spread it around so that we keep everybody stable. So I've just given you 4 different options. It's about money, it's about shell, it's about how you spread it around, it's about how you sustain it over a long period of time. And if you think about these, and you're all businessmen, the answers to the question that I started with, if you had 100,000 bushels of shell, if you had $100,000, they're not the same. And so the question is that when you sort of come to these decisions, and when Andrew and I discuss these things beforehand, one of the things that we don't do, because it's not our job to tell you guys what to do, is tell you if we take option A, this is what we think with this particular cost for the market, or this particular cost for the shell, or this particular cost for moving the shell, what we think the eventual economic impact is going to be in terms of bushels at the dock that you can either sell if you're a waterman or buy if you're a processor. I think when we do this, though, because we're now in this situation of riches, the question is, could we do that? And so after the last time we sat in here, when I got up at the end of the meeting and I said, what you need is a sort of a decision tool that looks at the dollars. And so I went back and talked to a couple of my friends, and talked to Ben, and we talked to Andrew. And it turns out that we have an enormous amount of information that we've never really used to inform you as to how we do this. That might sound sort of bad, I haven't been doing my job for the last 30 years. We know where all the stuff is. You've asked, can we give you an estimate of what's in the Bianca tank? Yes. Can I calculate a quota? I offered many years ago to calculate quotas for Mr. O'Reilly, and he very firmly told me where to go. I won't recall all of that conversation, but it was fun. But we've got all of this data on stock assessment. We know what grows where. You guys do as well. We also know that if you take seed from place A and you put it into place B, they don't always naturally translate. If you take seed from the upper part of the James for many years, there was only a limited number of places you could put it because it was disease susceptible. Seed in the upper part of the James is smaller than seed that you get out of the lower part of the James or out of the Bianca tank. So if you're going to move it, it's going to take you longer for it to grow. And you know all of these things. We know all of these things, and we've got all the information, and so has he. We've just never put it all into one place. And so a few months ago, we started to try and assemble all of this. And my colleague, I have a young colleague by the name of Andrew Shelton, he's a very bright economist. And we sat with Andrew and we said, could we actually take all of this data and do two things. Talk about the sustainability of the fishery. Now, there's a couple of pieces of that. I'll get to it. And how much money it will actually produce at the dock. So if we're going to spend $100,000 to start with, what does it translate to in the end at the dock? There are different answers to that, as you well know. So you can take your shell and you can put it down and leave it there until you've got markets, and then you can harvest it. And then you look at it and decide if you need to put more shell down again. This is essentially what we do in the Rappahannock. We have a model now for all of those years of what's been happening in the Rappahannock. We can take the shell and we can put it down, and when it gets to seed, we can pick it up and move it, we can put it somewhere else, and then we can harvest. If we do it on public ground, it's a certain set of costs and a certain set of returns. If we do it in terms of seed, then we get to the seed and we can sort of open it up to private planters, in which case the return comes back in two forms. One is when the seed goes out, and then the other one is when the private planter harvests, and then there's a tax end of it. Or else we can simply sell it as seed and ship it all to Maryland. And if you suggest that one, I'm going to get up here and give you 20 reasons why you shouldn't do it. Nothing wrong with the people in Maryland. The point is that we have all this information, and we've never really sort of looked at it all in depth. And if we go from 2006 onwards, which is really sort of post-disease, so if we go 2006 to 2021, we've got what, 17, 18 years worth of information. I have it in my stock assessment. He has it in his planting data. We've got a lot of it in terms of harvest reports. And we can actually do an economic analysis on that. So I talked to my friend Andrew and said, how will we best go about doing this? Because again, let's go back to the question. You have 100,000 bushels of shell or $100,000 to spend. How do you maximize what comes back? And after we'd gone through the equations, and I backed up and I said, okay, Andrew, now tell me in English. And the end product of this conversation is that I have a very bright graduate student by the name of Alex Marquardt, and you'll meet her at one of our subsequent meetings. And we decided that we would try to do an economic analysis of all of this information, which it would become a chapter in her doctoral dissertation. And so what I'd like to do is to tell you that, A, we've started this. We sent a request to the VMRC Fisheries Improvement Fund, which, you know, years ago I'd forgotten all about this, but apparently it has money that we can actually devote towards this, so we can pay to help the student in terms of stipend and tuition. We can collect all this data, and then whether you like it or not, you're going to be dragged into a conversation about how we interpret this. Because one of the things we would like to do at the end is to provide you with a decision tool. Now, you do this every day. You decide where you're going to take your boat, when you're going to put diesel in it, when you're going to come home, how much you're going to barter for at the dock in terms of it, depending upon the bushels that come out, whether you're going to shuck them, whether they go to a shuck product, whether they go to a box product. You do this every day. But what we'd like to do is to give you an economic decision tool where the three of us come to you with these options. And instead of just having yes, no, what month, what we'd like to be able to do is to say, okay, if we open this up and we do it as a seed fishery, and we take out, we'll choose a number, 10,000 bushels, where are we going to put it? What's it cost to get it back in terms of after it's come out? Either shell, or if there's enough shell there, how many times can we circulate it before we put shell back? And then if it goes out to a public rock, or if it goes out to private planters, what are your economic returns going to be? And so when you get this question up here, it's not going to look like that. It's going to be, if we open it, this is what we've spent. This is what we expect to come back. Now, you could sit there at the end of it and be very callous and say, well, option 3 is clearly the one that generates the most money. That's the one we should do. And actually, that's not what we do here. One of the things that I've watched for the last 25 or 30 years is that you don't do that. And you've done it this afternoon. You're going to open it up so that the people on the Northern Neck have somewhere to fish towards the end of the season. You're preserving a lifestyle, you're preserving a lifeline for guys who work up there. So there's a social component in it as well. With all due respect, one of the things that I've watched you do when you do this is that you do an apples and oranges trade-off. At the one end, you can argue that you will spend money to create money, and at the other end, you're spending money, or you're taking repletion, and you're keeping people in a job. And the two aren't necessarily the same. And it's not that I wish to create for you a tool that's going to demean that component of what you do. That component of what you do is extraordinarily important. Extraordinarily important. But what I wanted to sort of tell you today is that we've started this analysis process. When we started it, we actually didn't realize how much information we had. The answer is there's lots of it. And as we go along, I will be coming along and, boring you with what we're doing with this. But it's for a purpose, because us academics can sit and look at all this data. And what we don't necessarily sort of include often is the input from all of you. I've talked with lots of you over the years. Sometimes we agree, sometimes we don't. That's fine. But the point is that I think if you have a tool that we can put into this so that we can say, every year, we have a limited number of dollars to start with. $1 million, $2 million, $3 million, $4 million. We have a limited amount of shell. What are we going to do with it? So when we do these sorts of options to you, we can also put a dollar number with it and a liability number with it. And the reason why we've chosen the seed fishery to start with is that in some ways, if you look at the seed fishery, it is really lucrative. If you do it well, harvest a bushel, plant a bushel, get 2 bushels back. If it costs you $10 to do the first part of it, and you're doing 1,000 count, if you get enough back, you can have an 8-to-1 return on it. It doesn't always work like that, but you can. Yeah, I know. Blake can tell me ones where he's put a lot of money in and he gets that much back. But the point here is that you can look at that, but in some ways the seed fishery is also one of the most difficult to maintain, because when you take the seed, you also take the shell, and this man has driven you mad talking about how much shell you need to leave in the system. So the purpose of developing our tool to help you is to give you a money number on the one side, but to give you an environmental tool, a management tool on the other side. So that when we get into these debates, like we did last time, about what should we do with the resource in the Nansemond, there were 2 very good arguments as to what we should do with it. Both of them sounded really good. The thing that we didn't have at the end of it was, well, if we choose one, how much money will it generate? And if we choose the other, how much money will it generate? You should have that in there. It's not that it should dominate it, but the point is you should have that number. And so what we'd like to do is to put all of this information that we've gathered, predominantly from about 2006 onwards, because prior to that we have disease problems in it, to look at all of this growth information for all of these different sites, what we know about how seed survives in various places, put it together with records, and then see if we can actually put some economics underneath it and come and share it with you. Maybe we got it all backwards, but that's where you're going to get drug into it, whether you like it or not. The purpose here is to create for you a tool. If you like it, if you can use it, fine. If you don't like it, you don't have to accept it. But the last couple of meetings that I've said, where I've sat and I've listened to you talk about this, it seems that sort of sitting over there in the bleachers, it's the one piece that's missing from this as to how you make these decisions. I'll offer it up. If you like it, good. If you don't, what you're doing is fine anyway. The fisher is going. Maybe we can make it a little bit better. So, over the next few meetings and over the next year or so as we go about this, if we can get some support from the Fisheries Fund, we'll keep coming back and talking to you, but also in many instances probably ask you for some inputs, because the things that we're going to need inputs for, which are highly volatile at the moment, everything from diesel prices, choose a number, to the price of oysters at the dock, to the stability of the markets that you guys sell into, which are also all over the place. So we've started the project. You've been absorbed whether you like it or not. I'll come back and talk to you next time. So, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Dr. Mann. Any questions?
All right. Pleasure, gentlemen.
Thank you so much.
All right. I think that brings us to our next item there. If you're
Number 4?
Yep. Oh.
discussions on the 2022-2023 public harvest season.
All right, if we could, I'd like to try to break this up maybe into a couple different recommendations. Instead of taking it all at once, it would be sort of a lot to take all at once. So I think there are some things that are likely going to have unanimous support and maybe some others that might have split support or less support. So I think if we can get as much consensus as we can and then have a good discussion about anything that there isn't concurrence with the committee members or potential staff recommendation, sort of break that up if that works for you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, that works fine. Is this something that's going to be brought to the commission at the end of August or September?
That is correct. Right now, we would like to be able to hold a public hearing to establish the season at the end of this month, allow folks sort of time to prepare for the season. We are working under a new executive order that actually touched on some of the stuff that Roger just mentioned there in terms of having to do an economic analysis and change our process slightly to sort of attempt to speed up the regulatory process. It's more intended towards some other agencies, but we're working through that process. So there's a possibility that we could push things back to September, but right now we're on track to have an August hearing on this season. Yeah.
Okay.
So I'll go some real quick background and then sort of jump into some items that like a committee recommendation on. So again, this is the season that's established in code. So this gives us our authority to establish these seasons. Again, this would what the season is in code right now. I think Tommy touched on it, that hand scrapes and dredges aren't actually mentioned currently in the codified season. So the way that we establish our seasons right now is through 507, which allows us to open areas in order to protect or promote the growth of oysters, and to close and open any areas or restrict the manner or method of taking oysters in these areas. So these are all the areas in the bay except for certain areas in the Tangier and Potomac Sound where the commission, in order to protect or promote the oysters or the clam fishery, can open these areas up. So these are the Potomac Sound management areas, and that's why these are the only areas in the Commonwealth that dredging is allowed on, is because code allows us to do what's good for the fishery and not for the oysters there. So in the past, all the seasons have been established to be more restrictive than the patent tong and hand tong season that you see here. So that's why we establish the seasons that we do. So as Roger mentioned there, we're actually in probably the best shape that we've been in 30 plus years in terms of the actual oyster densities throughout all areas in the bay. So this is all the areas that we survey, close to 10,000 acres combined into one slide, so you're not overwhelmed with lots and lots of these beautiful graphics that I'm showing you here. But what you're looking at, that green line is that, let me see if I can get the old laser pointer up there. There we go. This green line represents 10 either market oysters per square meter, spat per square meter, or liters of shell right there. So it's kind of a good reference point on any of the graphs that you look at basically at 10 liters of brown shell volume or live oysters. That area has enough room for not infinite spat, but there's a physical covering of oyster shell that's available for recruitment. So at 10 liters of shell, that area can continue to be as productive as nature will allow. So as many spat as there's surface area, literally there's shell on every piece there on average at that 10 liter threshold. 10 markets is right about where a hand tonger in shallow enough water can make a day's work, can get their limit when you're getting about 10 markets per lick. It's usually an area that's suitable for hand tonging. At 5 market oysters, usually that's an area that's suitable for patent tonging. So patent tongs that can make quicker grabs. It's better, of course, than any area if there's more oyster densities, but it's sort of what we've been seeing is sort of between 5 and 10, that area would work out as a patent tong area in terms of catching your 8 bushels per man or 16 per boat. And at 10, those areas can usually support hand tong harvest, and you're able to get a limit within a day. And sort of below that, those areas really at 4 or 5 market oysters per square meter or less, even down to like half a market oyster per square meter. When you're dredging or scraping, you're still, even in that noon time frame, able to get a limit there when there's almost no market oysters in those areas. So when the oyster densities are high, you can get a limit with a scraper or a dredge in 45 minutes. But if they're low, even to less than 1, you can still usually get a limit if you're consistently, say, going in a circle that's, I don't know, 100 yards distance of a circle, you're going to come up with 100 market oysters in your dredge bag there. So that's why those gears are so efficient at those low densities. But that's where we are now, what we have to work with going forward. Again, public and private oyster harvest combined, you can see that we've really started to recover from that downturn that we saw, primarily market conditions during the COVID pandemic. So both public and private ground harvest has increased recently here. So that's a little bit of background. I have a plethora of other information if you'd like to see on any specific areas as we go through. I can pull it up, but that overall, almost every single area that we're talking about today has market oyster densities at 10 or higher for the most part. Even some of the dredge areas, the hand tong areas, where almost every single harvest area right now is at that 5 market oyster threshold or higher. So all of the areas right now on average are in really good shape, and some of the areas are in the best shape that they've been in ever, with market oyster densities over 20 markets per square meters. So these are areas in parts of the Rappahannock, Deep Rock area. Things are looking really good in a lot of these areas. So really there's more market oysters available right now as of this year than there has been in really a long time. So these are some questions, and thanks for the committee members that sort of answered some of these questions in advance and sent their comments back. But wanted to kind of run through these for the committee to take action on, and I'll give a little bit of background on these questions, and then we could take some recommendations towards the end. But the questions that I'd like to try to get a recommendation on first are whether or not we should open all the Potomac tributaries this year. So we'd had a little bit of a rotation and planting strategy there for, I think, going on 4 years now. Whether there's any committee desire for new hand tong areas. So there's some oyster ground in Indian Creek that in the Northern Neck area, that's public ground that had some lease applications near it. We went out and surveyed some of those areas, and there's actually a decent oyster population, some market-sized oysters in those areas. And again, this is an area that hasn't been open to any harvest in a long time. There's been some discussion about establishing a potential hand tong line in the very upper portion of the Potomac Sound. So this is areas 9 and 10. This is one of the areas that we've moved some seed to in recent years, and perhaps have some discussion on whether or not we should, either this year or in future years, try to establish a hand tong line there like we have currently in New York, Rappahannock, and James River there. There's been some talk at the last committee meeting about adjustments to the Potomac Sound rotation area to remove an area in Beasley Bay from the current rotation cycle and put it on next year. So we don't have to take action on that. We could do that next year, or we could decide to take action on this one. And then there has been some discussion with committee members and others about adjusting the harvest rotation areas in the Blackberry Hangs and Great Wicomico areas. So I think a couple of watermen had reached out, as well as some committee members, about looking at opening the Great Wicomico area. Right now it's split into a 2-year rotation with areas 1 and 2, but opening up both of those areas this year and leaving Blackberry closed and sort of doing an either or. So these are relatively small areas, and sort of do a 1 year on, 1 year off, with similar to how we do in the York River, where some years Mobjack was open and the whole York was closed, but this would be a sort of smaller version of that on a 2-year rotation. With Great Wicomico, the whole hand scrape area opened this year, and then Blackberry Hangs next year with Great Wicomico closed. And then Peyton had mentioned it earlier there, and there was some recommendations and input from the committee about 11 a.m. harvest curfew in October, and then 12 noon for the rest of the season. So I think there's, I guess, a couple of reasons for doing that. One is the warm weather harvest restrictions. This would allow ample time to get off the water and get your oysters into mechanical refrigeration. and that October timeframe when the harvest curfew is at noon. And also, it would be a potential conservation measure, and would likely remove any temptation for sort of double limits or anything like that there's been some anecdotal discussion about, and it's happened before in the past. So right now things are good enough where there's no reason with a hand scrape that if you're out there at sunup that you're likely going to have your limit in an hour and a half or 45 minutes if you're really quick is sort of what we've been looking at here. So there's some discussion on that. And I'll give a little bit background on all of these, and then if it's the will of the chairman and the committee, we could kind of run through those and get some input discussion and a recommendation on each one of those, and then move into the rest of the season. So I'll try to be pretty quick. This is Indian Creek. Again, this is sort of just below Great Wacomico, Little Wacomico area there in the northern neck. And this is actually now a surveyed lease, but these are the public grounds in question here. There's not a ton there. It's a thin little sliver. Some of them had sanded over, but I went out. I'm not the best hand tonger, but we did find some pretty decent market-sized oysters in some of these spots, sort of thin ribbons and hair. It hasn't been open in a long while, so if the committee would like, I think staff would be in favor of sort of a season that would be concurrent in this area with other tributaries. And if it works out, and if there's consensus that there's good bottom there, it might be an area that we could look at getting into the seed planting in these areas, sort of as an additional area in the northern neck where we could potentially move some of this seed if it does look like good bottom and there is any interest in these areas. Again, they're relatively small areas, but something that
Kind of
we
water
could look at.
depths there.
I could reach them at an average tide with a set of 14s.
Okay.
So
Which ones are the rocks? The ones in
The
the brown
blue.
or blue?
in the blue here.
Blue,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
So everything's on the north side.
Yep, everything's on that north side there. Indian Creek coming in here. I think there's a YMCA camp up there, an Indian Creek Yacht Club there.
I think the commission here, within the last 6 months, approved
Some leases.
lease, that area was leased, right?
That's correct, yeah. That's that green that you're seeing there. That's not that was the original application, but a modified version of that was approved, yeah.
Has the,
Yeah, go ahead.
has the condemnation line moved around close to those public?
There's a
rights?
seasonal condemnation there that's related to a marina, but it is something that I think I want to say it's right here. It's very close to sort of the top of where that is there, yeah. That's something that we'd probably have to look at and see when that seasonal condemnation kicks in or out. You know. But the mouth of that area is open. And actually, I think where the lease line cut off, we wouldn't lease in condemned areas. So I think maybe this upper portion here might have been the condemnation line, and then there was a seasonal condemnation line further down. And then again, these are areas 9 and 10 in the Potomac, just to sort of give folks a visual. We planted some seed all in these areas and a couple of the reefs that we survey as well as here. And I think just sort of this upper piece of area 9, try to pick a geographic point. And again, we don't have to necessarily make this change this year, but look at potentially establishing some line, we do have a reef area there, so we already have some markers out there, but potentially look at putting some buoys out and actually establishing a line by regulation, sort of at least on one of those areas where we planted seed. So we've done some seed planting on a number of areas down the shore down the sound over the last couple of years, but look at potentially establishing a hand tong line in this area. And this area, I've gotten calls about it from a number of old-time harvesters in the past. There is a lot of private ground in this area, but this is an area that's a very tiny piece of public ground, but it used to be, my understanding, a pretty good oyster rock in the center of the Nansemond Ridge. It was an area where it had supported traditional hand tong harvest, and there had been some requests in the past. Nothing too recent about opening this area, but it is a very protected area that you could work. It's kind of a little island in itself amongst there, and I wanted to see if there was any desire to have this area open if there are any concerns. There is a lot of public ground or private ground around that area, but there had been some requests that came to staff from watermen who said that they used to work this area and they'd like to see it open again, so wanted to bring that up. Again, it's one of those areas, it's a small rock, apparently it's pretty shallow. Staff hasn't been out in a long time to look at it, but it's one of those areas where we had a request to open some of that area.
The acres in that piece, Henry?
Not very much. It's probably less than 10, I would say.
It says 3 acres.
3 acres, okay. It's a tiny little area there, but it was a piece of public. I think it's kind of the high spot if you look on the chart, so a pretty good piece of rock there at some point. But again, it would likely be, well, if it's hand tongue, you're going to see exactly where they are, but definitely wouldn't open this area up to dredging, but it is a rock that's supposed to be productive there. Again, it's close to James River. There's lots of other areas to work. But this is just a request that had come to staff, I think, a couple different times over the years, and wanted to bring it before the committee to consider. And then the last item on that would be the request to sort of carve off this area of Beasley Bay, roughly here. So Shell Rock and the areas that are mostly worked are sort of in the western side of this, but almost no one, in my understanding, works in this area. Heard sort of anecdotal reports that there are some oysters coming back on sort of old rocks in these areas, but there's very little effort that goes here, because when this area is open, which it would be this year, the effort goes a little bit closer here to Shell Rock, where it is going to be a good season, but and no one really goes over here. So the item would be to potentially look at carving this area out sort of from this area here across, and including that in next year's rotation with Area 1 in the Potomac Sound. So sort of do a little adjustment and try to get some effort there when Shell Rock is closed, a little bit closer, but also sort of spread out the effort that we're seeing right now on Bird and Marshall's Rock, which is where most of the folks go this year or next year's rotation. And with that, I'll go back to these questions here, and I'd be glad to answer anything, but we could go through those and see what the thoughts are. If there's a recommendation on those, be glad to incorporate that and take that forward to the commission.
All right. We'll start with the opening of the Potomac Tributaries. Is there any questions or yeah, go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, Andrew, in the, let's see, in the cone, were you looking at opening everything in the cone? Because last year we had 77 and 78 closed there.
Mm-hmm.
So are you thinking this year to open it all?
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
yeah, that'd be correct. Yeah,
Okay.
so sort of all the traditional areas there. I think with the seed that we've moved a number of years, and the quality of the seed, having some larger oysters mixed in there, and the growth rate that, and past planning, that there's going to be a considerable number of markets available in all the traditional areas. Yeah.
Okay, well, everyone I talked to up there that's hand tonguing, we're in favor of opening all 3 areas at the same time. The cone, the Namanai, and the Okamako. That's their thought, you know. Didn't know how you would feel about that, but how you want to break up the months, you know, and then, you know, possibly next spring, you know, in March and April, Great Wakamako and the Pianki Tank, if things work out there. So that's kind of what I'm hearing from them guys. Yeah.
Okay.
Any other discussion or comments on the Potomac Tributaries? Yes, please.
What months are you thinking about? Are they gonna be, traditionally, it's October and November, maybe December?
I think that's what they usually are.
Yeah.
I think that sort of those areas would kind of look like that for what we were talking about there. So this would sort of be the seasons in those areas that we just discussed there. So sort of that October through December.
What they traditionally have been.
Yes, yeah, along with that Indian Creek area and that potential for that Nansman area there.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, Mr. Cole.
Andrew, on the Indian Creek, what would you think about March because of the condemnation? And also, this will be the first year that's going to be open with a new lease in there. It would sort of also, you know, it would would be more activity and more eyes and so forth in there. How would you feel about that?
I think that that's something that it's definitely good to potentially spread out some of that effort in March, that it wouldn't hurt, so we could, I think staff would support a recommendation on an Indian Creek season in March.
Okay.
Is that when we were potentially thinking about the Great Wacomico Tongan, or
Right,
the same
that's
time?
correct. Yep, same time period.
Probably make it a little bit easier on law enforcement too, if you're gonna open all three of the Bay tributaries in Potomac. That would also keep the Northern Neck MPOs from having to be in Four Rivers, so.
Any other questions or comments?
So Andrew, what you have that now, that's your recommendation, that's October, November, December?
Yeah,
On
yeah.
Lower Wacomico
And Potomac Tribs.
Right,
Yeah.
okay.
So right now I sort of have those traditional hand tong areas with those two new areas added there. Yeah.
Okay.
All you need is a general consensus on these.
Yeah. I mean, if I can go ahead and put them in, and right now it sounds like a season in March. Is there any discussion on that in terms of one to have the October, November season there, or I mean a little bit?
Mhm.
Yeah.
As long as we got all the months covered, I'll be in favor of it.
Yeah, I just don't know the Indian Creek, how much attention that's gonna get
Yeah.
if you open that the same time as you open the Great Wacomico.
Yeah, it's pretty close together, yeah.
And then the Great Wacomico hand scrape will open in February? Is that your proposal, you think?
Right. I think so. Yeah. Or December, January. Yeah. I think December, January, likely. Yeah. So I mean, we could do a November, December season there or something.
I was thinking November, December. So that way it would be before the hand scrape starts in the Great Wacomico, and it would be also during the Potomac tributary hand tong season, and that would be up in that general area for law enforcement too, if they opened that in December. Were you just thinking 1 month for that area?
There's probably there's not going to, depends on how many people get there, whether it
Right.
lasts 3 months, but it could be as long as 3 months or 1 month, or just sort of a trial period. I don't really have, I think they're going to quit pretty quickly if there's not a lot there after 2 weeks, but one person might be able to work there if that's all that comes out for 2 or 3 months.
Yeah.
And that was my thinking in March, 1 or 2 people with the market conditions being better in March for the past several years, that 1 or 2 guys could probably make, a decent month there by themselves without everyone piling in there or what have you. But it's kind of.
So Andrew, you're calling this the Great Wacomico hand tong area, is that what you're designating?
This would be the Indian Creek area there, Indian Creek hand tong area. Yeah.
How about, I thought we were talking about Great Wacomico.
Not yet. No. All right, well, do we have a consensus for October, November, December for the Potomac tributaries and Indian Creek March?
That's a move.
All right,
Second.
we have a motion, we have a second. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? All right.
All right. And then I guess this next one there, in terms of the Upper Pocomoke and Nansman River areas, I think there's some folks that have private ground, and that would be the main concern. Is again, there's private ground close to there, but it's a public rock, so it in theory could be open to the public. So, and we've had some requests there, and again, the Upper Pocomoke. Again, these are areas that we planted seed, and we don't have to make a decision on these. Sort of status quo would be to leave them alone, but if there's a decision that the committee would like to discuss now, it'd be good to hear it as well.
No, I'd certainly like to hear from Dan and Don on this one.
Andrew, on 9 and 10, I know you want to open it up for hand towing. I'd just like to leave that alone for this year, and I know you opened up part of it in November, but as far as establishing a hand towing area, I'd like to see how much effort is going to be put into it this year. I'm not opposed to it as long as we've got some hand towers, but I just hate to see it closed down if nobody's showing interest in hand towing, if you know what I mean.
Thanks for that, Don. Dan, are you going to pick up a set of shaft tongs?
No, I hope not. I'm not saying I won't, but I hope not. But I kind of agree with Don. I also weren't under the understanding, the concern that I have is I weren't under the understanding that when we voted to spend this money on seed up there, that I never knew that there was going to be a place up there just designated for shaft onion only. Mm-hmm. I don't remember that conversation. I feel like that's just been thrown out there. I don't say a whole lot about areas 9 and 10. I kind of let Don and the Saxon Islanders, have a whole lot of say, and I usually back them. But when it comes to spending how we spend our money, I think everybody knows that I've been kind of a stickler over that. And I don't remember saying we're going to put seed up there and we're going to designate a part of it for shaft onion. That's one of the problems that I might have with it. Well, the sad part about it here on the shore is we're not opened up until December 1st, and especially this year with high fuel prices, hotel rooms going out the roof, and as far as price, and a lot of these guys are not going to be able to afford to ride to the James River and go over there and stay nights and eat out on 8 bushels. And if they had a place here to hand tong in the month of November, that would help. And that's the only reason I'm for it. I'm like Dan when it comes to it. I'll try it just to see what's there, but I'm a drudger. But, these guys are hurting here on the shore when it comes to oyster season. When you got December, January, and February, it's a long time between feeder biting and December 1st. And like I said, as far as going over on the western shore anywhere dredging this year with an 8 bushel limit with the price of everything the way it is, I don't see how they're going to do it. So that's the only reason I'm thinking about the hand towing, just to give guys something to do in the meantime. I agree. I agree with what you're saying, Don. That's not, I don't want you to think that I'm not saying that. What I was saying was, and I'll put it out there, I felt like this was Andrew, I felt like this was your way of sneaking it in there, that we're getting ready to turn this into hand towing. That's what it felt like to me. As far as if Don and the Saxon Islanders wanted to open the month of November for shaft towing, I have no problem with that. But I just don't like that raised my eyebrow when you said we're going to turn this into a shaft onion line. I was never aware of that language when, that means it's never to be hand scraped again. And I just felt like this was your way of throwing it out there and maybe even sneaking it in. And I didn't particularly care for that a whole lot. That was my concern.
No, I understand you, and I wanted to bring that to the committee there and sort of put that out as an option. So a lot of these areas are super shallow, and particularly in some of those upper areas, and are even hard for Jerry to plant. So those are the areas that we'd be looking at, not any of the areas where we can replenish them. So that's one of the reasons that we switched some areas in New York to hand towing, because those areas are so shallow. But I hear what you're saying there, and this doesn't have to go forward as this, but just so you are aware, what's on the screen there is everything staying the same in the dredge area. There's that Potomac hand tong area, which sounds like doesn't have overwhelming support from the representatives from that area. And then I have just 9 and 10 that would stay status quo, open to hand tong starting November, and then running to a hand scrape season there in February. So that's sort of have the whole area open to hand scrape in February, but open prior to that for hand tong there if the small boats can't get out of Saxis to go dredging, and then having that November season that Don had mentioned there.
Well, I mean, I don't know if this is the time to bring this up or if I need to bring this up later when it comes into the Tangier Pocomoke Sound rotation area. Can I bring this up now or should I wait? You know, it's something pertaining to 9 and 10.
Well, if yeah, I guess so. If we're talking about 9 and 10, you go ahead and bring
All
that
right.
up.
Well, and look, I'm not even proposing this. I would like Don's input and Andrew's input on this. They left a lot of oysters there the last time it was open. We didn't have to go over there. There were enough oysters in this sound. They left a lot of oysters over there. They planted seed up there. The seed that was planted this spring, I seen it when Jerry's boat come in. It had enough markets on it. You know, it already had enough markets mixed in it. Would it hurt it? Would it do irreconcilable damage to open that for hand scraping November 15th and then the month of February? You would, you know, I mean, according to what I heard, they left that on and then was getting their limit 8, 9 o'clock by the time they quit, by the time March come in. It would be something for the Eastern Shoremen. They wouldn't have to go to James River or Rappahannock, wherever it is they have to go. I don't think with what's been planted over there that it would really do irreconcilable damage to it. You give it 2 weeks. We do this with these areas in Rappahannock. We do this with, you open it up December and February places. You know, you give it 2 months up there. I'm just throwing it out there. Would that help? Would it help and would it hurt the rock too much?
Well,
It would certainly help, Dan. And I'll be honest with you, I don't think it would hurt the rock because you're going to have some boats there, but you're going to have some people that's going to still be hard crabbing. I mean, there's a lot of people in my area that don't hard crab, and I don't think it would hurt. I'll be honest with you. I don't want to kill 9 and 10. Believe me, I don't want to kill anything. But I think it would. I don't think it would hurt one bit to open it up for 2 weeks. That's my opinion. I mean, it's up to Andrew and whoever, but I agree with you.
yeah, I think
Go ahead, Andrew.
I think that's something that we need some input from Andrew on, but like you guys are saying, I mean, the economics this year are extremely difficult. It's going to be a hard year on oystermen, especially if you have to travel, and it probably could help the people in your area out a lot. So I'll let Andrew elaborate on what it may or may not do.
You go, Andrew, I just wanted to throw that out there too. This doesn't have to be the main rotation. I know, like we'd like this 9 and 10 to go to be on the backside of Shell Rock, so that Shell Rock doesn't get killed. By that time, it gives another fresh place. The last time this happened, Shell Rock was done by February because everybody went up there. And, our people on our side, there are enough oysters on our side. That's a long run for us. For us to go up there, that's a 15-mile run. And I'm not saying this has to be a permanent rotational move. But if the oysters in the bottom can stand it, why not? It seems like the market's good so far through the end of last year's oyster season through the summer. Well, why not? And if that would help the Sax Islanders out a lot, let them let them do it 2 weeks. Stop it and open it up again February.
Well, I think the concern is always having any one area there sort of a standalone area. So I know everyone would love to stay hard crabbing and get a good price all the way through November, but the concern is if everyone on the Eastern Shore price drops out of crabs and or whatever happens and everybody decides that they're ready to go oyster in November 15th, that 2 weeks has the potential there if there's nothing else open where you end up with 2 weeks with a lot of boats in a relatively small area. But I hear what you're saying about the economic need, and I think that's something that all of us, and I know staff does, and I'm sure everyone up here has to keep in mind that these aren't just numbers in a spreadsheet, but it's someone's pocketbook, and that's an important thing to consider there. But maybe something that I'm not sure ready to commit to anything at this point, but something to throw out there for consideration would be to have maybe just one area opened up for 2 weeks there, and then at the same time, again, it's one of those things is you're likely to not necessarily have anyone go hand tonging if there's a hand scrape area up there, but maybe have the first 2 weeks open to hand tong in area 9 and then switch over for 2 weeks and have area 10 stay hand tonging until they're both opened up in February. Might be a way of splitting that up and sort of trying to spread out effort at least a little bit more.
Dan and Don, I just wanted, back when Dr. Wesson was the head of the Shellfish Department, and we were at the other building down in Newport News, didn't we have an issue like this once before where we opened an area up a couple of weeks ahead of time? I remember we had a whole lot of people come to that meeting from Saxes.
Go ahead, Dane.
I didn't mean to step on you, Don. I remember a year that Area 9 was open. That was when we had the 4-day week. Area 9 was open for 2 weeks, and then Area 10 was open for 2 weeks. And then, then the December harvest come in, where all that was closed. And I do remember that. I'm not certain of the specifics, but I think that was when we had the 4-day week. We had to take Fridays off.
I think you're right. I think that's what it was.
Remember that, Mr. Chairman?
Dan, you're right on that. Okay. We've got, Andrew, we've got an area up there, I don't know what you all call it, 11 or what? I mean, we've called it 11. That's never been opened up for dredging. And there is oysters there too. I just don't, I'll be honest with you. I definitely do not want to hurt the oyster industry in any way, shape, or form. I don't think it would hurt to open it up for 2 weeks. As far as this hand tonging, I talked to you on the phone today. I just want to see how many people are going to hand tong. And I just don't, I'm like Dan, I don't want to take a rock away for hand tonging and nobody's going to do it. And I think that's yet to be seen, whether they are going to do it. I mean, you opened it up before, and there's like been 1 or 2 boats that go out there for 2 or 3 days, and that's it. I mean, we put a lot of money in up there. We put a lot of stuff there, and it needs to be harvested one way or the other. And if hand tong people are not going to do it, then it should be opened up for dredging. I know where you're coming from, but we talked about on Area 9, Dan, opening up the very upper part of it as far as a hand tong area, but it's yet to be seen how many people is going to do it. That's going to tell the tale. So,
well, yeah, I think I figured that's where he was. I worked up there a time or two, but if I'm remembering right, everybody over there is in an outboard. I mean, he's talking like, Andrew, you're talking like it's shallow water. Everybody over there is an outboard. They're potting in places. The pot's out of the water. It might result in your big box turns not being able to work comfortable up there or something like that. But I mean, the shallow water is not that much of an issue. With Don and them, I don't like the fact during all this discussion, and me and Don has discussed this. Like the last meeting we had, you all were talking about somewhere over there in the right behind it getting a place open in April. Everywhere is getting something else. And in all honesty, as far as Tangermans, I feel like I'm speaking more for, with Don than I am for us. Most of us crab right through November. Most of us crab right on through. That's when the prices usually get best. It seems like November's turned into October now. Crabs is later. But I just don't understand why, we're giving this place March, we're giving that place November, April. We're giving all these other places a little pinch here and a little pinch there. But when it comes to, Don's talking for his people. He's representing the Texas Islanders, and we all know what it's going to cost them to go to James River. And I just don't think 2 weeks would hurt a whole lot. I really don't. And in whichever way, I mean, the way that you said, Andrew, you know, that would be between you and Don. If it only took one place being open or whatever, I just don't think that would kill a whole lot.
All right, that's some more discussion here at the table.
I mean, which place, Andrew, if you decided to do it, which place would you want to open for 2 weeks? You don't have to open up both of them. You can either open up area 10 or area 9.
Well, again, I think probably the lower area would make the most sense for that 2-week season, and those shallow water areas up at 9. And that's part of the reason, I think, isn't so much working them with a dredge or a scrape, it's planting them. And we can hardly get a boat in to plant some of these areas, let alone a shell barge. So so that's the main reason for these areas that we really can't replenish, that are in 2 feet of water at low tide, almost 3 feet of water. But those would be good hand tong areas where you could catch 28 bushels, particularly if we did a shell plant on there, and make a really good day's work if you're willing to do it. So that's the concern there. But I think that you know, that's something that we could explore. But again, sort of as Dan touched on, the difference over there is there's really just 2 big rotation areas, and then sometimes 9 and 10, whereas the Western Shore just has a lot more areas that have been in different rotations that have been split up a number of different ways. So there's already a lot more built-in options. I think what we're collectively trying to do is get some of those options over on that side, but it's hard to do until you have the oysters there, and we're finally getting those oysters there. So Area 11 is one of the only sanctuary areas over there that has oysters on it. And then there isn't a hand tong area over there, whereas there are lots of hand tong areas over there. And the only gear type is dredging. So we're trying to split things up in a similar way and sort of start small over there, and then go from there. But it's hard to, I don't want to make sudden changes there, but I don't think 2 weeks would be huge, but it has potential to sort of set us back in that longer term planning if it does end up being a problem. So that's sort of where we're at on that one. But I think, again, if folks would like those 2 weeks there, I mean, the other option is 2 weeks at the other end of the season, potentially. You know, there. And then we could see.
Well, you know, let me ask you this. Shell Rock is still open up December, January, February, right?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay, so you're open up 9 and 10 for February. So if you open up 2 weeks before that, what's going to happen is people are going to get back down to Shell Rock and work February if you take the 2 weeks off. I mean, it's, Andrew, I don't believe it would hurt. If you want to open up area 10, that's the deeper part. That's right there to the Virginia-Maryland line for 2 weeks. I'll be honest with you, I don't think it would hurt.
Well,
and it would just be, I'm like Dan, it would be just for this year. It wouldn't be in a rotation thing, just something to try out and see what's going to happen. I mean, the bad part about it is, just like Dan said, and what I've been saying all along, we over here, it's December 1st for oyster season. Over there, it's October. And you know, nothing against you guys over there. I mean, great people, but they've got options going all up and down that shore. And the option we have is right now probably spending half of what we make in a day to go and stay and eat. And it's just, you know, it's just not cost effective. You know, that's the only sad part. I mean, that's what I've been up against the whole time. I've got a lot of people over here who don't understand why we're not open up sooner. And and I understand where you're coming from. So, I mean, that's the way I'm leaving it. You can do what you got to do. Just what we'd like to see doing is up to you and whoever.
All right, I got some other people at the table here with some comments.
I would just like to say that I think from a resource standpoint, it's very dangerous. I agree with Andrew, just opening up one spot for 2 weeks, but I believe that this committee owes it to the people on the shore to look at your surveys and see if we can't get them 2 weeks in November, maybe with more areas than one opened up, like you mentioned, maybe 10, or, you know, I'll leave that to the guys that know the rocks better and you, but Mr. you know, the more area you open up at one time will negate some of that, you know what I mean, all the boats showing up at one spot. So but maybe we could look at you could show us some of the surveys for those rocks and
Right. Well,
see if it looks like, hey, 2 more weeks is going to be all right.
well, these areas were planted with shell this year, so we haven't resurveyed since those plants. So a lot of these areas were also just planted with shell, but these are some of the lower density areas. I can pull those numbers up later there, but
They're slated to come open in December, though?
right, yeah. So prior to those shell plants or those seed plants, these areas were sort of in that 5 market or below type area there. But again, these areas do have patches where people had hand tonged or where that seed was planted where they'd done well. So it's a very patchy area in terms of high density spots. But again, it's one of those, if you open up both of these areas to hand scraping for 9 and 10, and that's what folks are going to do, and there's not going to be that division of gear types that we have over here. So that's sort of one of the things I think that's worked out well is, you know, there's areas that are good enough to hand tong and you can get 28 bushels versus 16. Some folks are going to do that, but if over here there isn't that option, then everyone's going to go hand scraping, and that effort stays in that one gear type, regardless of how many areas you open up in that gear. Everyone's going to do that if there isn't another option. So I think trying to keep some option open for another gear type up here is going to help overall. If hopefully 4 or 5 boats want to go hand tonguing all season long up there, that takes 4 or 5 boats off of shell rock, off of dredging, and that adds up to a lot of oysters and less effort in those areas. So that's sort of what we're trying to work towards there.
Any other discussion? Tommy?
Would a 10 o'clock time limit, I guess this is a question for staff and for Don, would a 10 o'clock time limit help negate some of that concern that if a lot of boats start showing up, and obviously if they start taking a lot of resource, it's going to take longer to catch it? I agree with everything that's been said. As a committee member, I'm in favor of anything we can figure out to try to get them a couple weeks over there.
Are you?
Kind of get
Let me see if I'm understanding you. You're saying a 10 o'clock time limit, like for 2 weeks? Is that what you're saying, Tommy?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Hey, yes, we'd go for that because, yeah, we'd go for that.
Well, I think if I'm kind of paraphrasing what I'm hearing, and I'll run it by Don, and maybe we can try to keep things going along. It's getting on here, but it sounds like there's a desire for a 2-week season, 10 o'clock time limit there, potentially, and I guess I think the staff recommendation would be to only have one area, area 9 there, area 10 opened up, and keep area 9 hand tong through December, and then open both areas up for the full month of February.
I'm all for that. Area 10 is the one that you need to open up. Area 9 is the one that's going to be the hand tonging area. It's the showless bottom. It's actually where you planted more, I think, seed on 9 and you have 10. So, I mean, 9's better for hand tonging. 10 is what we'd like to have open for 2 weeks at a 10 o'clock time limit.
Chairman, I'd make a motion to that effect with Andrews.
All right, we have a motion on the floor. Do we have a second? And we have a second. Andrew, if you could repeat what you said again.
All right, so let me see if I can do that. No, I think it was a 2-week hand scrape season in area 10 in the month of November, the second half. Hand tong the first half of the month in area 9 and 10. Area 9 stays hand tong through the month of December, and then both areas are open to hand scrape for the month of February.
In the last 2 weeks of November, ending at 10 o'clock?
Ending at 10 o'clock, yep, for hand scrape.
Okay.
That's going to be hard to write the regulation, but I think we can figure out that puzzle.
Dan and Don, is that satisfactory?
That is fantastic. That is fantastic, yes.
If it's following with Don, it's following with me.
All right, gentlemen, thank you. All right, we have a motion on the floor. I'll ask for all in favor, say aye. Aye. Those opposed?
Aye.
Chairman votes aye as well. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, gentlemen.
All right, is there any, I'll go back to these questions. So I think we've got Indian Creek solved there. So that was March season there, and have that Potomac tribs, the normal seasonal areas open. I think Upper Pocomoke, we've been over on that side for a while, but defer to Don real quick. I think it sounded like in a previous conversation that we wanted to wait on making that decision to change those rotation areas. Those areas are going to be opened up this year, but it sounds like the effort's going to stay at Shell Rock and now Area 9 as well, or Area 10 there. So is there any desire, Don, to make that change or any from the committee now? Or do you think that can wait?
You're talking about the Hansong area? Is that what you're talking about, Andrew?
No, the Beasley Bay adjustment there.
Oh, yeah, the Beasley's Bay, we just leave that alone until, for next season.
Okay.
Just put it into the rotation with, Birds Rock, Marshall's Rock, in that area.
So we can hold off on that one. And then, the Nansman River, was there any discussion on that?
That little piece, that little 3-acre piece. Staff recommending that we open it up.
No, it's just that wasn't going to be a recommendation one way or
There hadn't
another.
been a pair of shaft tongs put on public bottom below James River Bridge in probably 30 years. So to change what's going on for 3 acres, I don't.
That's a long run from Deep Creek though.
Right.
I don't see
No,
anybody.
I'm not even sure. This was a couple years ago where I'd gotten a number of calls about it, so I'm not sure if they're even still in the fishery.
I don't either from anywhere. I mean, Boat Harbor would be the closest, but.
It sounds like it's gonna cause more trouble than it is good. It sounds like to me.
Probably already.
Mr. Cohen.
I move we defer this
Okay.
discussion.
Motion to.
I'll second it.
All right, we have a second.
What was that motion, I'm sorry? To defer this conversation.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, chair votes aye as well. Motion passes.
Thank you. Kicking right along here. And then I guess other area rotation adjustments. So that Great Wacomico Blackberry hangs on alternate years. Was there any folks in favor of discussion on that one?
I'm in favor of it because Great Wacomico area, that's a small area to have 2 rotational. And Blackberry been worked pretty hard. I think this is the time for Blackberry to be on a break and have Great Wacomico and Blackberry be on a rotation. All the Great Wacomico would be one, and all the Blackberry would be the other one.
And I agree with Rich. I think it's a good idea to do it that way.
Is that every other year?
And we did plant Blackberry, that area with reef shell this year, and kind of expanded the footprint a little bit. So, and what I've heard is things are setting really well in the Great Wacomico right now. So hopefully some of that is going out and up there, and it'll be a good year to give that shell plant a rest there. So I think staff would be in support of that for this year.
All right, we have a motion to make those 2 areas rotational.
I'll make the motion.
We have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Chair votes aye as well. Motion passes. Thank you.
Thanks. And I think the last thing on here was sort of the 12 noon and 11 a.m. discussion. And I guess there's a couple things. October would be the first question, whether it's just, in the past, it had just been hand scrape and dredge. We're sort of limited to that 12 noon. This year we have those warm weather harvests. So the question is, all gears 11 a.m. Or keep everything at 12 noon, or just hand scrape, and if hand scrape, what gears would have these restrictions? I guess so the 11 a.m. question would maybe be the first thing. Staff is sort of neutral on this. I understand from a resource concern that 11 a.m. and noon, there's not a lot of difference, but from the warm weather harvest restrictions, these may be folks who aren't necessarily used to doing them. It might give them time to ensure that you're not in violation of the law by allowing that. But again, they should be in before noon anyway, and they could have an icing permit. So staff doesn't have a strong opinion on that 11 a.m., but I think we would be in support of noon for hand scraping and dredging for the entirety of the season.
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah, go ahead.
from a buyer's perspective, the 11 a.m. would make it a little easier than a boat showing up at noon and trying to get that unloaded and under refrigeration.
Yeah, we did this on the Potomac one time. We opened the OMR in September, and we had an 11 o'clock quitting time just to give you that hour to run in and get unloaded, and it worked well.
Is that for all gears? I think that would probably be the.
Well, it was just hand scrape then.
Okay.
So.
I mean,
Please, Mr. Cowell.
I think it's gonna have to be all gear. I mean, from a health department record keeping standpoint, they're gonna drive us nuts with this. I know how bad it is now, and it's gonna, you know, if you've got time cutoffs that are different, they're gonna want you to prove what the gear type was, and it's gonna be nearly impossible. So
I think it should be consistent.
Yeah.
Makes
Yeah.
sense.
I agree too.
I agree with
Probably
Tommy.
the best thing to do, yeah.
All right. Well,
I have a question if no one's talking.
yes, go ahead.
Is this 12 o'clock all year?
No,
The
it's
whole oyster season?
I think
Or is
it's
this,
just-
are we just talking about October or what?
just October.
What?
Just
Oh,
October.
just October. All right. Thank you.
I think this would be 11 a.m. in October for the warm weather stuff right now, Dan.
Okay. I mean, but like for our season, you know, we've been 2 o'clock from December and January, and then it goes back to 12 February.
Yeah.
Is that the same, or?
I think
I hope not to be there till 2, but we've seen it. I mean, you know, if you ain't seen oysters die, you ain't done it long enough.
Well, I think right now, unless something drastic changes, you shouldn't have an issue there. So I think for consistency, and we can take it all. It sounds like there's pretty good consensus on the 11 a.m. harvest there for all gears. I think 12 noon. I don't think there's going to be an issue there with the resource now, and that would prevent any of the temptation for double limits that has happened in that area in the past. But again, I'll make a public commitment now that if things change, that the time can change. That's not something that's set in stone. So, but I think for consistency, it might make sense to keep it 12 noon for scrape and dredge sort of across the season.
Well,
but
I understand
what
that,
you're
but
saying too. Last year it worked out okay.
By the time we get going, it's getting sunrise 20 after 7, and I don't think we'll have an issue with it either. I'm not going to sit here and kick and scream over it. But if something does happen, you know, if something does happen to the oyster, something does happen to the resource, you're talking 3 hours and 40 minutes, or 4 hours and 40 minutes to make a, you know, I've seen it where that's not enough. I've seen it where I can't make nothing out of that. And I understand from the resource side of it, but I also am just coming to you from the side that we've got to make something.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Cowell.
to Dan and Andrew's point, I'd like to make a motion that we have an 11 o'clock all gear harvest limit in October, a 12 o'clock time limit until that could be revisited at our December SMAC meeting.
I'm fine with that.
Is that a second? We have a second?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, any more discussion on this?
Yes, I do. Tommy, is that
Okay.
12 o'clock? I'm sorry, is that 12 o'clock for Pat and Tong too?
For all gear.
All gear?
I have a question. So that would be shaft tongue, 12 o'clock all season long as well?
Was that the recommendation
Through December,
through December?
we could talk about that at the,
I just so folks know is there's a chance that might not be a quick regulatory change with the new executive order, so we're working through that process. So we're hopeful that we can smooth that over, but the emergency regulation process might not be as quick as it has been in the past, but we're still waiting on some guidance for that, so.
well, I mean, what I'm trying to, Mr. Chairman, what I'm trying to put forth is getting rid of emergency regulations, period, and having a December meeting, that we're not trying to advise the commission to make a decision for that entire period of time. We give ourselves some flexibility at a December meeting to make recommendations to the commission that would address from December to the end of the season. But, you know, we had two, one passed, one did not, emergency regulations last year that probably could have been addressed in a December meeting that would have gone to the commission, public notice, and then could have been voted on in time, that it wouldn't be an emergency. So that's kind of where my thought process on this is coming from.
So I thought we were on the 11 o'clock harvest. Is that what we're on?
We're on 11 for October.
Right.
And then we would be on 12 o'clock until our December SMAC meeting, and we would revisit what the time limit is going forward.
Okay.
Personally, I'm fine with the 12 o'clock. I agree with Andrew.
Okay.
But I hear I hear Dan's concern, and that would
Right.
give us an opportunity to
What
read, and I hear Peyton's concern. that would give-
My concern is when we get to November, what was the usual time for hand tong cutoff?
2 o'clock.
It's been 2 p.m.
It's been 2 o'clock.
I'm worried about the hand tongers too. Sometimes it's cold in the morning, they start a little bit later, they're looking for slack tide. That's, you know, it's not unusual for them to come in afternoon with plenty of bounty, you know. Just,
Yeah, again, and also, you know, you
But
can
I know-
get wind in the morning and then it calms down.
in October, it needs to be, just because of the warm water harvest. So it would just be too hard for us to try to keep it apart. I agree with you 100% on that. But after that, I don't know.
More discussion?
And I'm open to an amendment to my motion if you want to exclude hand tong, and that.
I can't make it.
I think that'd be a good idea, Tommy. I think it'd be a good idea, yeah.
And Tom, how do you feel about patent tong also?
Go ahead, I'm on a meeting.
Just keep it the same, I think, well, what?
12 o'clock.
12 o'clock, yeah.
I mean, 11, obviously, everything has to be 11 in October, but going forward, 12 o'clock, and then as far as the hand tong, and I'm open to suggestions from people that.
Let me see if I can explain this, get this motion right. All right, in October, everybody has to be done, well, quit at 11, be done by 12, be unloaded at 12.
Correct.
Right? When November hits, it's all gear, 12 o'clock, except for hand tong, which will go to 2 o'clock.
And I'm open to whatever that time.
That was the amendment.
Yeah.
Yes, and you accept that?
I do.
Okay.
All right, let me make sure I got that right. So October 11 a.m., all gear, November 12 o'clock, hand scrape and dredge, and patent tong, and then 2 p.m. for hand tong.
Yep.
And then revisit in December.
Revisit in December. So we'll have to make sure that our joint commission meeting November, December happens then, but I think we can work that out. Yeah.
December, it's like 7:20, something.
Any further discussion on this? Hearing none, I'll call the vote. All in favor, say aye.
I ain't gonna make it.
Thank you. Chair votes aye as well. Opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes.
All right. I think that was everything on that one. So we got some good consensus there. Let me go here. So this again was a season I think that we discussed minus Nansman here and Indian Creek, moving to March. Does that look? And then a hand scrape season there, so I think we're okay on that. And I wanted to sort of get into some discussion now. I know it's going on towards 6, but if the committee is willing, wanted to try to move through this and have a good discussion, but talk about potentially any gear change in Area 2 in the Rappahannock. There's been some discussion about how these areas, once they reach a certain shell density or market oyster density, can actually support a change in gear type. There's been a lot of harvest effort that's shifted away from hand scrape areas in the Rappahannock and other areas and has switched over to patent tonging. And for the first time this year, we've been able to do as close as we could, sort of an apples to apples comparison between gear types and a post-harvest, and sort of have the actual amount of harvest in Area 1 and Area 3 and 5, which were on the same rotation this year, compared. So what you're looking at right now here for the patent tong area in Area 1 was 2017 was sort of the last year it had been open to hand scraping there, and you can see about 31-ish and change thousand bushels came out of there. It was replanted that fall in 2018, and then starting in 2020, that area was taken out of the current rotation and shifted over to a patent tong only area. And now in that same 3-year time period, we've harvested 43,447 bushels from that area, and it hasn't needed reshelling. So after this area was harvested in 2018, the culch volume was getting down below 10, close to 5 in some of these areas, and we spent hundreds of thousands of dollars planting many tens of thousands of bushels of shell in that area. We were fortunate, we got a phenomenal spat set there, and even a year early in the rotation, this area supported that patent tong fishery. And that's the harvest that we've gotten out of an area that does not need any replenishment effort. So because of not having to put those 50 to 100,000 bushels of shell there, those have gone to other areas in the Rappahannock, other areas in the Potomac and Tangier Sound, and we've seen this split up in effort by gear type that has resulted in both hand scrape areas getting better, as well as these patent tong areas getting better, and also not needing any replenishment. So again, this is Area 3 and 5, and it straddled the harvest season. And again, Area 1's a little bit bigger than Area 3 and 5, so it's not a perfect comparison, but you can see just in that one rotation, and again, these areas were replenished with shell. They were in need of shell this year. After harvest, they got close to 50,000 bushels of shell planted on these areas, whereas Area 1 doesn't need any of that shell. But we got, again, about, give or take, about 32,000 bushels out of that rotation with the hand scrape. So we're actually getting more harvest with no replenishment dollars spent by having Area 1 in patent tong right now, based on the last 5 years of data or so there. Again, this is sort of the gear area comparison between Area 1. So you can see this is after the area was open to harvest. Again, the market oysters are over 10, or considerably over 10 here. This is the green bar there. So there's almost 30 market oysters per square meter there. Again, the number of smalls, even after harvest, up over 35. And most importantly, this brown bar there is over 10 liters. So you can see that the area did drop a little bit with that harvest we had in there over that time period. But compared to Area 3 and 5 together that were open to harvest by hand scrape, we saw the brown shell volume drop below that 10-liter threshold. Almost half the small oysters weren't there in the spring resurvey, and the number of markets did go down, but not as much as we've seen it go down in previous post-harvest surveys. So that's good. This areas 3 and 5 were in better shape than they had been post-harvest. I think with having some of that effort split up in other areas that this committee's done good at balancing. But these areas still were, prior to harvest, below that, sort of after harvest, below that 10-liter threshold, whereas they were at comparable levels to Area 1 prior to harvest there. So Area 2 right now, and this is a question that I'd like to hopefully have a vote on, or a recommendation from the committee, is right now Area 2 is right here, and you can see markets in green right there are up at those levels over 10 markets per square meter. Smalls, and many of these are close to market size, or getting close to 30, and that brown shell volume there is still a little bit below 10, but it's still one of the higher points that it's been in a long while there. So this area will likely, if it's opened up to hand scraping, require replenishment. So some 30 to 50,000 bushels of shell would likely be going in this area depending on the needs. Or if it were opened up to patent tonging, we could explore adding that to the current harvest areas. Area 4 right now, I think, is also in the best shape that it's been in a long while. But this area, I don't think there hasn't been any questions right now about changing this area over to patent tonging. This is an area that any folks know has a lot larger bars, a lot easier to plant. Area 2 is sort of a lot of those thin edges. They're a little trickier to plant. They can't support as many boats. But Area 4 right now, again, has some of the highest market oyster densities, as well as an incredible number of small oysters. So over 100 small oysters per square meter right there. And the shell volume is in really good shape. But sort of that in mind, I tried my best to take some of the committee recommendations and put them in sort of 2 sheets that I'll give you right now to look at.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah.
Before we move forward with the season, I would like to discuss this Area 2 patent tong. I think we need to iron that out before we discuss the season. But respectfully, Andrew, if you go back to your slide, patent tonging versus dredging, how would you think those numbers would work if you put the same number of patent tongers there that you put scrapers in 3 and 5?
Well, again, it's hard to say. So there was about 20 to 30 or so boats consistently patent tonging for 4 months in Area 1, and there were 40 to 60 boats scraping in Area 3 and 5, split up for half of that time on each area. So it's comparable, I would say, in terms of.
I think you're overestimating your patent tong number. I would defer to Rich, but he and I think your records would indicate probably we're in that area getting the majority of those, and this is not an apples to apples comparison. If you drove everyone into a patent tong fishery and they all piled into any of these areas with the same amount of effort that we're putting into scraping, I don't see how anyone could agree that those numbers would look the same. And to the planning, I'll quote some of what you said in the past. When I questioned the rotations in these areas, it's worked pretty well. I mean, we've had a pretty good success in Area 2 since 1999, 2001 of getting these areas planted and seeing recruitment and having a good harvest behind it. I don't like the direction that, I'm in agreement with Area 1. It's not my absolute preference, but it seems to be working. But going back to Dan's comment, I would not be honest with anyone here if I didn't question that this is a attack to move us closer to patent tonging in the whole state. So I do have an issue with the Area 2.
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah, go ahead.
Tommy, well spoken, really well spoken. I have to agree. I think you overestimate some of that patent tong numbers, and believe me, I am greatly, patent tong Area 1 has been good. I think it works well. But you have some people out there that cannot patent tong and skiffs, and I just don't think moving forward and making more areas for it. No offense earning them, as you guys patent tong, but there's some boats out there, just can't do it. They're limited. So I'm not in favor of this, and I 100% back Tommy on what he just said.
Well, if I may, I just wanted to put the season up there to look at, because I think I understand where the committee's coming from on that. So I wanted to sort of put these up side by side as what potential seasons would look like with this option. And again, it's one of those things is we try not to manage these areas by area, try to manage the fishery sort of as a whole. So by having that effort split up by different gear types, different areas, I think it's hard to make a decision just for one area with not taking every other area into consideration. So I think I understand where we're going, but I wanted to put that up there so you can sort of make a full comparison of what potential these seasons would look like if you went that route. And again, this is something I wanted to discuss with the committee and hear their input. But the idea is to always have an area that's open to hand scraping at the same time that areas are open to patent tonging. And there's going to be a day when we can't plant 500,000 bushels of fossil shell sometime in the next, maybe as soon as 7 to 15 year time range. And, you know, it's a finite resource. The shell dredge could break down next month. And all of the areas in the Rappahannock absolutely do work under the current management strategy, which is a 3-year rotation followed by shell planting and then harvest again. But if that shell planting has to stop sometime in that 10 to 15 years, I'm hopeful that it'll still work, but that's something that if there's less areas in need of shell, we'd be better positioned to handle that 5, 10, 15 years down the future. So I'm not advocating that everything go back to patent tonging the way that it was when the condition of the resource is what it is right now, 30, 40 years ago. But it's something that if you can transition these areas towards a less efficient gear type, you can put replenishment dollars to make other areas better. If something does happen to our replenishment program, you don't lose oysters 2, 3, 4 years after you stop planting shell, which under the current management strategy is likely what would happen. If we don't plant shells after we harvest these areas as intensively as we do, then those areas' production levels go down. Whereas what you're seeing now is in Area 1, we've gotten more oysters out of that area, regardless of how many boats worked. We got more oysters out than we did when that area was opened up to hand scrape, and we haven't had to put a single dollar in. So in Roger's cost-benefit analysis, we're getting 40,000 bushels out, we were putting 0 in, and it worked. Whereas every hand scrape area in the Rappahannock, we get 40,000 bushels out, but we put maybe that much or more in every year. So that's sort of the something to consider is not just that one area, but what do we do 5, 10, 15 years from now? And that's why I wanted to start this discussion now, because we're at a point with the harvest densities or the market densities in these areas where you could make this change and not impact industry because the oysters are there where it would work. When we opened these areas up to hand scrape the first time, we were lucky if we were getting to 10 market oysters per square meter. Now we're at 20 or 30. So that's sort of the background on why staff would be proposing some of these changes and the discussion I was trying to have with you all this evening.
Andrew, 3 years ago, we patent tonged Area 2. Do you remember the volume that came off of there?
It was in that I think 10 to 15,000 bushel range. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't remember how much effort, how many boats were there?
Not offhand, but there has been an increase in the number of patent tong licenses sold from 5 to I think over 50 or 60 in recent years.
I got you. So your proposal to take 2 and make it all patent tong, and I see Area 4, you're proposing 4 months on Area 4 for hand scrape?
That would be, I think right now, an option. I'm not saying this is a staff recommendation, but an option that would look like
that's
comparable areas for hand scrape there.
Yeah, that's a problem.
Going 8 and 7 first.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, I mean, I'm just reluctant to step on the different users, you know, and I'm patent tonging myself, you know, but I'm not sure, you know, with Area 1, we've got, don't you think so, Ernie? I think we've got a pretty decent area that takes most of it.
Good suggestion, but he ain't gonna like my suggestion.
But, you know, to just have Area 4 and then, you know, fill in with 1 month in 7 and 1 month in 8, I'm not sure that's really spreading, you know, I like to see the fleet spread out like we did last year, you know, And I think, in a way, on the hand scrape side, we're actually getting away from that now with this. So I'm really, really reluctant to cause a problem between the patent tonguers and the hand scrapers. And believe me, I hear it all the time. I got to understand the numbers and the replenishment side of it, and it does make some sense, but I kind of have to agree with Tommy. I'm not sure it's a good idea.
You want my suggestion?
I'm all ears.
I suggested, leave that hand scrape and give us Lawson Bay to the bridge.
Patent tongue.
Or Patton Dong.
What's Lawson Bay? Is that?
From Mosquito Point to the bridge. It's closed, been closed for years. That was always good Patton Dong bottom, and I'm pretty sure it's good now. It was, anyway.
Well, there is, I think, some reef projects in there that you wouldn't want to get your tongs wrapped up in, so that's something that.
Yeah, but that's a bridge right there at the end of the point, but on up there it's good.
And I guess that's.
Get everything all that wins.
Right. Well, I think this sounds like this discussion is probably too much to have today in terms of any kind of major change or adjustment in the harvest rotations beyond what we have now is sort of what it sounds like. But I think it is something that maybe not this group tonight needs to bite off, but I think when the second Blue Ribbon Oyster Panel met there was a plan to revisit the whole rotational strategy after a full 2 years or full 2 rotations that has sort of happened through SMAC, but not officially. So it's something that right now the major concern isn't this year, isn't probably the next 4 years. It's what do we do 10 years from now if we don't have enough shell to maintain the status quo of harvest, plant, wait, harvest, plant. Like if we stop that, I mean, the current system would be in trouble. So that's something to start talking about now, but it sounds like there isn't consensus going forward. But this season there on the right is sort of my attempt at compiling the various SMAC recommendations that came in. And I think that the staff would be largely in support of the majority of this, with the exception of, I think, keeping the James River areas compact, similar to this. Works out a little bit better. I think having a 4.5 month season in the James River, it would be longer than we've had, except I think 1 year. Usually it's a 3-month season, and on occasion it's been a 4-month season. I think it works better to have those areas compact and sort of together. Helps keep boats spread out as we talked about. But
could you do 2 weeks on the one on the right and just end it in 2 weeks in February? Keep some of the pressure off of the other hand scrape areas that are open in February. If not, you're going to have 2 areas open, York and the.
well, I think in this one there you'd have hand scrape, yeah, just those 2 areas there. So 2 weeks might work out a little bit better there.
2 weeks up, take it from. I don't care if you take it from in November, and just slide it down.
That would be a 4-month season altogether there.
All total altogether. I mean, I don't know that it would make much difference, but you could, if you wanted to just take the month out of November area 1 and then put 2 weeks in February area 1.
I think in Tommy's recommendation, that might be something to sort of revisit in December there again, sort of that 2-week extension in the season, see how things are looking. Would that be something you could consider?
It's a lot hard to get the season extension. Yeah, it's easier to do it now. I mean, I think
Go ahead.
I'd like to see us close Deep Rock November and December to get January, February, and March, the whole month of March. Because nobody's going out there November, December when they can work in area 1. But we'd rather have the 2 weeks at the end.
Yeah, March.
makes sense.
March is just going to be much better.
That'll help spread out some of that market too.
Well,
Hard to get.
So you have the entire month of March, not just 2 weeks.
March. Last year when we finally
Take
had
off 2 months.
some market for,
2 months for 2 weeks.
it seems really, October is great, when a lot of people are still crabbing. It's not a whole lot of oysters harvested in those 2 weeks you that we're getting in October anyways.
Mm-hmm. Well,
I think
I
you
guess,
need to take February and 2 weeks off on early one, because I think that'd be too long for it. At the end.
well, I think the idea is to keep have at least for patent tong and hand scrape and really all areas is never have any one area open by itself to any gear type, whether it's patent tong, hand scrape, or hand tong. So I think as long as we can do that, staff would be largely supportive of that. So I think having at least one area open to hand scrape, 2 areas, and again, patent tong and not have any standalone seasons there. I think that's why keeping those areas concurrent would I think staff is going to have to support at least having concurrent seasons, and this would be the maximum concurrent season you could have that staff would be in support of. Would be 2 weeks into March, all the way into November for both those areas, and boats can go where they're going to go in those areas, but when you split areas up and stretch them out, you end up with a longer season, which increase more effort.
That's not a bad thing, a longer season.
Right. From a resource perspective, that means there's more oysters leaving, there's more effort in a focused area. But
I would support.
Mr. Chairman? I'm sorry. Go ahead, Tommy.
I would support Ernie's request on that. I mean, I think I heard earlier that Deep Rock had a huge population. Did I hear you right on that? The Deep Rock and Area 4 look really good.
Right now, every area is, for the most part, better than it has been in a long while. So that's something to take into consideration in terms of the option would be to take more oysters this year or to make changes in rotation strategy because you're able to without impacting the resource. So all areas are in better shape. Yeah.
We did see, with the extension of Patent Tong and then Deep Rock this past year, we didn't see a flood of boats. It was the only thing open, and it was pretty much, I think we lost 2 boats. And it was a couple that actually stopped going. So I wouldn't be in favor of this if it were hand scraping or that type of gear type in a popular area, but Deep Rock really has not had much effort.
And a lot of people are going crab potting in March 17th too.
What did we do, Andrew, March 1st through 15th this year?
I'm just trying to pull up an Excel sheet because I don't think I'm going to be able to capture all these recommendations in a note here. So
Still March.
hold on just a second there.
First 2 weeks in October.
Would you have a recommendation to come back and revisit this before the next meeting?
We're hoping to have a draft regulation ready to go tomorrow. Yeah. In order to meet the new executive order there. So I can take a SMAC recommendation, and like I said, I think, let me see if I can find.
I'd love to get area 2, but I know that's
this was the best I could do for what was going on here. Let me see if I can do some.
Now, is that
quick-
saying November
to the area
is
1?
half the month as well in January? I'm sorry.
Hold on, I can run through this right here and see if I can capture what I've heard so far into an SMAC recommendation here. So this is that 11 a.m. harvest there. So we'll tick off James River. I think I got what Cody had there.
What is that, 12 o'clock?
That's half and 12 o'clock.
Yeah, gotcha.
All right, so that looked like the James River there. October, I think it's 15th, works out just about the middle of the month, maybe 17th. there. Did everything else look good on the top there? Hand scrape in the York, 2 months. York River, Hantong area there. Patentong, this is where we started getting into discussion there.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman.
Yes, go ahead.
And Tommy, I have a question, and this is what we were kind of discussing down here. Correct me if I'm wrong, gentlemen, but Patentong Area 1, you got 2 weeks, and there it goes.
Oh, hold on a second. Let me see if I can find that there. All right.
And I think when was that, 2 weeks? February? March. Could we move that? And I don't know how you feel about this, Tommy, but in October, the first 2 weeks in October?
So that was area 1.
Yeah. Because you don't have hand scraping starting the middle of October.
Yeah, that makes sense to split the boats up.
Think so?
Yep.
How does that look?
No, you gotta take it off of area 1.
No, don't leave it.
And we want March in that. In my opinion, you can take the first 2 months off, because ain't nobody gonna be working their time.
I'd agree with that.
Close Deep Rock on,
November and
But
December.
it don't make no difference, again, if somebody wants to go out there and fix something.
Area 1, if something happens, you wish you hadn't done that.
Mark is gonna take care of that.
You better leave it like it is.
Well, I think this, again, I'll give that an option, and if they're not going to go there, it's not going to hurt anything having it open, so. How was other areas in area Rappahannock looking there? I think that was a little bit of a, go ahead there.
I'm curious why area 8 and 7 are only open 1 month, but the other 2 are open.
Because it was open last year, and it was a 2-year.
Gotcha.
They're not on rotation. Oh, it's supposed to be, but that.
They didn't, 8 didn't get open but 1 month last year, so it gets the other month this year. And 7, we're doing it on a 2-year rotation.
Well, these are sort of
3.
put and take areas, so we've kind of always used them sort of as needed to fill in gaps if there's a need in the market there, or if we've put seed up there. So they're not in the same rotation schedule as areas 1 through 6, or now 2 through 6.
Andrew, I know area 8 in November was something I had thrown out there. I have had a couple of watermen that have mentioned having area 8 in January. I would like to hear what, JC, have you had, or Rich, anybody down that end, have you had any feedback on that?
I'm sorry, having in what area you win?
In January instead of November?
Yeah, that'll be fine.
See what else we have in January.
I think that would alleviate some pressure off area 2 as well, so I think staff would be more supportive of that.
Yeah, that's fine.
I didn't
No
think
problem.
about that very well in my first recommendation. I think it makes perfect sense.
You said January, Tom?
I believe you put it under 7, Andrew.
Nope.
No, 7 was there.
There we go.
No. It was in January.
Area 8, January.
There you go.
7 would be December.
There we go.
I'm pretty impressed with staff's Excel skills on the fly and all.
Well, you can see I've played around with this a whole lot. So.
Gotta fix 2 weeks for.
If it were me,
Mr. Short.
I'd save it now, Andrew, just for good luck.
Now, on that, Waukon,
You know, we get somebody's.
got
Maybe that's the last
area
one.
2, that needs to be changed to 2 in 1.
Or just take off 2, just grab.
Or just take the 2 off.
Right.
It's all open in Waukon, yeah.
And Blackberry not open at all.
Right, no blackberry there. Let me get rid of.
Oh, yeah, Indian Creek is gonna go, what'd you say, March?
Yeah.
Make sure I get the right month there. There we go.
I mean, are you okay with that, Andrew?
I'm going to look at this carefully, and I'm
I
not.
was talking about the March.
Yeah.
Indian Creek.
I think either just having folks kind of being out there and seeing what's there wouldn't hurt things. Yep, and Nansman, it sounds like that was a resounding don't want to talk about it. So let me delete that.
I've never known anybody working in your creek in my life. Not since I've been
In private, I'll be quite honest, I mean, it was good for you to identify those public bars. I didn't know they even existed.
I think, again, it was, I want to say 2 or 3 years ago at least, where I'd gotten a couple calls asking how come we never open this area, and sort of when we're getting into oysters coming back, thought I'd bring it up here, but I hadn't heard anything, so I don't think there's a loud constituency asking for it there.
like me, I didn't even know it was that. You want to see if I did?
All right, I think, are there any other,
Andrew, Milford Haven, what you got for that?
say again there?
Milford Haven. And,
Milford Haven,
Up above.
yep. Usually that's been consistent with the season
December,
at Deep Rock.
January, Okay,
So keeping that consistent with that, I'm not sure
Okay.
folks are going to go out there, but those two have kind of gone hand in hand. If it's a real bad day and you want to not go Pat and Tongan, you can go
Yeah.
to Milford Haven kind of thing.
yeah, so you actually got 5 months, okay.
The other thing that I didn't mention yet, but we were looking at expanding that Milford Haven area. It's again another very small area, but
Yeah,
I think there's
talking, yeah.
been some good area. So looking at basically expanding the footprint there and making that a little bit bigger open area, Milford
Okay.
Haven there. So I could read this real quick and see if there's any other input there, or we could vote on it if you folks want to. Well, it's only 6:30, but we're a little half an hour over here.
We covered a lot, Andrew.
Yeah.
I would make a motion to accept that if everybody was ready to.
Yeah, we've got a motion to accept,
I'll second it.
and we have a second. Further discussion?
Renee?
Yep, I'll call the question. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed? All right, the chair votes aye. Passes. Thank you, Andrew.
Well, appreciate that lengthy discussion there, and maybe Tommy's kicking himself for adding some more agenda items. But,
I was gonna maybe suggest we defer that.
Andrew,
I would ask if the Shellfish Division could give some thought to the definition of a scrape that could be codified in code, do away with the term hand scrape and just call it a scrape, what it is, and some real thought of kind of boxing that thing into what it is, weight-wise and so forth.
we can do that partially by regulation, but I think having stuff codified might be good. So we can do that. I don't want to keep you here much longer, and I don't think this is going to be an important change, or it's going to be an important change, but it's not going to happen immediately. But I know this committee had asked about the transfer of eligibility there, and we're working on some language that would basically allow a medical exception if you had 40 days of harvest history in the last 2 years.
okay,
One of the last two, or if they're the transferee, the transferor was deceased. So if there was a sudden death and you'd had 40 days of harvest history the year before you passed away, then you'd be eligible to transfer. And that would be a clear line. I think alleviate some of those concerns that we had with people getting sick and trying to get their 40 days or a sudden death.
So it's 40 days in the past 2 years.
If you have a medical exception or have passed away.
can I just kind of go over my thoughts a little bit on that, Andrew? If I kind of brought this up. You know, I agree, medical and military exemption, I'm all for that. I think that's good, you know, we need that. I would like to see, and the watermen I've talked to would like to see a 70-year retirement age. I think that's in line with our reduction in our commercial registration. And I just think 70 years is, you know, if someone's worked that long in the fishery, then he should have the ability to be able to get out of it and get a little something out of it for his retirement, you know. I don't have a problem with 40 days. I like the 2-year thought. I hadn't thought of that. I was kind of thinking more of like a working year as opposed to a calendar year. You know, say you go from February one year to February the next year, or however it works out. Just a record of how many days you acquired in the last working year. And if it exceeds 40 days, then you would be able to sell your license, you know.
I think that 2 years would cover
We'll
that.
cover that, yeah, I think so too. But just, I know it's late, and I just want to say that I think everybody needs to recognize that I think we've accomplished what we set out to do back when we established these rules, you know, with 600 licenses. And I think right now we probably got, I think I remember around 300 people reporting harvest. Andrew, is that what it
Between
was?
300 and 400.
Yeah,
right now.
between 300 and 400, over 700 are licensed to work, but they're not working. So we have a lot of latent effort in this fishery. And so I think